Cindy had mentioned my previous film and my previous work in Darfur, and in many ways this project, which is called Rebuilding Hope, very much grew out of my first film, which was Darfur Diaries, because when I went to Darfur in 2004 and I filmed there, we really went with the goal of bringing back stories that just weren't being told at that time in the mainstream media. This was before George Clooney had gone to Darfur. This was before Angelina Jolie told us to care about it, and it was really largely absent from the mainstream media. That has shifted. You know, from the time we got back to Darfur and started making the film, Darfur did become something that you would see in the headlines in the mainstream media. It shifted largely because there was really a groundswell of grassroots activism from people who decided that this was something important and this was something we should care about. So on the one hand, I was very appreciative that there was this grassroots movement, and that people did start to pay attention to Darfur, and that in some way there was some light being shed on the crisis there. But I was also somewhat disturbed by the fact that Darfur was looked at so much in isolation, as if somehow Darfur existed in a bubble without a historical context or a geographic context or a political context. Which of course it has, and that context can't be understood. Darfur can't be understood without looking at the rest of Sudan, the rest of the region, I would argue the rest of the world, but very specifically the decades-long civil war that had happened in South Sudan. And you know what the future of Darfur may bring, and what the future of the whole region will bring, is very much connected into what the future is of South Sudan. So that was how my interest in South Sudan developed, and it very much came. I mean, there's people sitting in this room tonight who are from South Sudan, who I met at the screening I did of Darfur Diaries at Traditions Cafe back in 2005 when we first finished putting together the film. And that was part of what also piqued my awareness about that connection. When every time I did a screening and people like Simon would come, right, I got your name right, Simon, yes. Simon would come and would stand up afterwards and say, what you're showing happening in Darfur, this is what I went through, this is what my people went through. It's all interconnected. So when I had the opportunity to go to South Sudan with 3 young men who were from there, had fled during the Civil War, grew up most of their lives in refugee camps in Ethiopia and Kenya, and then they came to the U.S. in 2001 as part of a refugee resettlement program. They were making their first trip back home. They wanted that to be documented, not because they wanted their own personal stories documented, so much as they wanted the story of what was happening in the ground in Sudan documented, and they very much wanted to use their trip and use that documentation to bring some direct benefit back to the communities they had left behind. So that is really what tonight is about. It's about a film, but it's also about how a film can both tell a story of people who are trying to do something when there's so much work that needs to be done, and then how we can all be some part of that effort. So after we watch